I have been Warden's Second Athara Station's containment block for 22 years. I have processed 8,411 detainees across 7 species. I have watched 3 riots, 2 containment breaches, and 1 incident the station commander still officially classifies as a scheduled maintenance error, because the truth would require him to explain. A Darathi enforcer spent 6 hours trapped in a supply locker by a creature that technically belonged to his own unit. I have seen a great many things in this block. I have never written a report like the one I wrote after the day of the Vorkai demonstration. I will tell it the way it happened, because the way it happened is the only version that makes any sense. And even then, barely. Commander Yavel came to me, 11 days, before the scheduled prisoner transfer, with a proposal dressed up as an order. His handler cult. The Keth Bonded, they called themselves. 6 specialists who had spent a decade conditioning and running neural bonded war assets, station's security contract, wanted to run what he termed a compliance demonstration. A show of force for the incoming human detainee cohort. 31 humans, political prisoners from the frontier annexation, being processed through Cathara before dispersal to labor postings. Yavel's theory was that if the humans saw the Vorkai in the transfer pit before their processing interviews, the interviews would go faster. The Vorkai, their Vorkai, the one they called Heth Ran, was 9 years bonded to lead handler Sovan Cruel. 9 years of conditioning, of neural link refinement, of behavioral lock. A Vorkai fully bonded does not respond to anyone outside its handler chain. It does not register strangers as anything other than targets or furniture, depending on its current command state. At full size, Heth Ran massed somewhere around 3,000 kilograms, armored in overlapping chitinous ridge plates the color of old iron, 4 legs like load-bearing columns, and a jaw structure that the station's own engineering specs noted, dryly, capable of compromising a standard pressure door in under 40 seconds. I asked Yavel if he had considered simply explaining this to the humans in words. He looked at me. The way commanders look at wardens when they have decided the warden's function is to open doors and file paperwork. I opened the door. I began preparing the paperwork. The transfer pit is the central processing floor of Block 7, a circular space 12 meters. Across, cargo-grade decking, cage tier holding pens ringing the upper level, single observation walkway above that, where personnel can watch processing without being on the floor. Standard freight hull conversion. The Keth Bonded had used it twice before for conditioning exercises. Heth Ran knew the space. What Yavel had not mentioned to me, and what I only discovered when I reviewed the escort manifest the morning of the transfer, was the staffing assignment for the pit floor. Cadet Sergeant, human. Cadet Sergeant Marin Solis, assigned to the human detainee escort out of the frontier garrison at Velt Station. File was thin. Frontier-born, 27 years old, had spent 4 years running prisoner transit on cargo routes too minor for the garrisons. Senior staff to bother with. No commendations, no disciplinary notes, no flag of any kind. She had been assigned to the pit floor because she spoke the detainee's primary language, and because, I suspect, nobody had looked closely at the assignment roster before stamping it. I calmed Yavel's adjutant to flag the staffing conflict. The adjutant told me the demonstration would proceed as planned, and that the human cadet would be briefed to remain near the access gate during the release phase. I wrote that exchange down. I write everything down. 22 years in this block has made me a very thorough man. The transfer cohort arrived at the 7th hour. 31 humans, travel-worn, quiet. In the way people are quiet when they have already calculated their options and found them insufficient. Solis walked them in herself. No secondary escort, just her and a single processing pad, moving them through the intake corridor, with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this so many times it had become a kind of rhythm. I watched from the observation walkway. She did not look remarkable, medium height, broad through the shoulders, in the way frontier postings make people broad, carrying things in low grav and high grav alternately until the body simply decides to be ready for both. Plain face. Hair pulled back without ceremony. She wore standard cadet-grade fatigues, with the Velt Station patch and the single sergeant's bar, and she moved like someone who had been on her feet for 18 hours, and expected to be on them for 18 more and had simply decided that was fine. I noted that she had not been briefed about the demonstration. I could tell because she was walking her detainees toward the center of the floor, the correct position for processing intake, rather than the access gate. Yavelle had either forgotten to pass the briefing to her unit or had decided it wasn't necessary. I considered calming down to correct this. I did not, because at that moment the handler bay door opened, and Sovin Cruel walked Hethran into the pit on the neural tether. The detainees saw it first. 31 humans reacted in the span of a single breath, a compressed, collective intake of air, a pulling back, reorganization of bodies toward any wall that wasn't the one the Vorkai had come through. The sound Hethran made was not loud. It was low, subsonic almost, a resonance that you felt in the chest cavity before the ears processed it. The ridge plates along its back had risen. In conditioning language, that means target assessment active. Celise turned. She looked at Hethran. Hethran looked at her. Sovin Cruel released the neural tether. What happened in the next 4 seconds I have reviewed on the observation feed 11 times since writing my initial report. The feed is clear. There is no ambiguity. Hethran charged. It covered 6 meters in the time it takes to say the number. Celise did not move. Not backward, not sideways, not into a defensive posture. She stood exactly where she was, processing pad still in her left hand, and watched the Vorkai come at her. And when it was close enough that I could see its jaw structure beginning to open on the feed, she said something. I could not hear it from the walkway. The audio from the floor mic caught it. I have listened to it many times. Easy, friend. Words. Flat. Not commanding, not pleading. The tone you use when you are telling someone to take a breath because the situation is already. You just haven't explained it to them yet. Hethran stopped. Not slowed, not veered. Stopped, all 4 legs breaking. The mass of it dropping its center and arresting momentum so close to Suclius that the displaced air moved her collar. The ridge plates on its back, which had been fully raised, went flat. Not in stages. All at once, the way a threat assessment ends when the assessment reaches its conclusion. The Vorkai turned its head. That enormous armored head, wider than Solis, was tall, and looked at her from a distance of approximately 40 centimeters. Then it circled her, slowly. The way a thing circles when it is not hunting but mapping. 1 full revolution, its plates brushing the deck with a sound like slow applause. And then it stopped with its left flank against her right side and sat down. Not lay down. Sat. The way a trained animal sits when it is waiting for the next instruction from the person it has decided is in charge. Celise looked at the top of its head for a moment. Then she put her right hand on the ridge plates behind its jaw and scratched lightly, the way you would with something a great deal smaller. Hethran made a sound I have no accurate word for, somewhere between a subsonic rumble and the noise a pressure seal makes when it settles properly into its housing. A satisfied sound. From the observation walkway above me I heard Yavelle say, very quietly, recall it. Sovin Cruel raised the neural tether interface. He sent the recall command. I know this because he told me afterward, and because the command log confirms it. Hethran did not move. Its ridge plates remained flat. Its head remained turned toward Solis. Cruel sent the command again. Standard protocol for a non-responsive bonded asset is 3 signals before escalation. He sent all 3. I watched Hethran not move through all 3 of them. What it did instead, it turned its head and looked at Sovin Cruel, looked at the man who had held its neural tether for 9 years. It made a sound I had not heard it make before. Short, hard, rising at the end. The station's behavioral specialist later told me the closest translation in the Vorkai's threat register is, "You are not the one speaking." I should note here, for the purposes of my report, that 31 human detainees watched all of this without making a sound. They had reorganized from their initial retreat into a loose semicircle about 4 meters back from Solis, and they were watching, with focused attention of people who have reassessed the situation, and found it considerably more interesting than expected. Yavelle came down to the floor himself. He was a large person, Yavelle, and he carried himself the way officers carry themselves when they have been obeyed for a long time and have mistaken obedience for something more fundamental. He walked to the edge of Hethran's resting position, and he raised his own command authority, commander grade override, theoretically supersedes individual handler chain protocols, and he said in parade ground register, Asset Hethran, disengage, turn to handler. Hethran looked at him. The ridge plates came up, not all the way, not the full combat assessment rise. Halfway, the register the behavioral specialist would later classify, somewhat carefully as social warning. Yavel took a step back. He took another. Celise had been watching this. She said nothing during it. When Yavel had retreated to a distance that apparently satisfied Hethran, about 3 meters, she looked down at the top of the Vorkai's head and said, "Come on then." She walked toward the access gate. She did not look back. Hethran stood up and followed her. 3,000 kilograms of bonded war asset, 9 years under the Keth Bonded's handler chain, contract-certified Apex security designation, walked across transfer pit floor behind Cadet Sergeant Mern Solis. Like it had somewhere to be, and she was the one who knew where. I had the gate opened. I don't know why. Instinct, perhaps, or the recognition that the situation had passed any point where my intervention would changed anything. Solis walked Hethran through the gate and into the secondary holding corridor, and stopped there. She sat down on the floor with her back against the corridor wall. Hethran sat beside her. She went back to her processing pad and started entering intake data for the 31 detainees. I stood in the gate for a moment. She glanced up. "Is there a room I can use for interviews?" she asked. "Somewhere quieter than the pit." I told her I would arrange it. "Thanks," she said, and looked back at her pad. I closed the gate. The Kethbond station contract was terminated within the same duty cycle, pending review of the neural bonding protocols and the circumstances of asset non-compliance. Commander Yavel filed a formal incident report attributing the failure to equipment malfunction. The command log, which I had already copied and secured per standard practice, attributed it to something else entirely. Hethran remained in the secondary holding corridor for 6 hours, until the transfer cohort's processing was complete. When Celise left the station to return to her escort shuttle, it followed her to the boarding ramp. She stopped there, and she put both hands on its jaw for a moment, not scratching this time, just holding, and said something too quiet for the corridor mic to catch. Then she walked up the ramp. Hethran sat at the base of it and watched the hatch close. It sat there for another hour. Station staff gave it a very generous perimeter. Eventually it let the behavioral specialist approach and lead it back to the holding pen, though I noted in my log that it went with the expression, if you can call it that, on a face built for war, of something that has made a decision and is simply waiting for circumstances to catch up. I submitted my report. I wrote it carefully, the way I write everything, and I included the audio clip of those 2 words from the floor mic because I believed it was relevant to the factual record. The review board asked me, during my testimony, whether I could explain how an unbriefed frontier cadet with no handler credentials and no prior Vorkai contact had achieved what 9 years of neural bond conditioning had failed to hold. I told them I could not explain it, told them I had watched it happen, and I had reviewed the feed 11 times, and I had no explanation to offer them that would fit in the categories their forms provided. What I did not tell them, because it was not the kind of thing that fits in a report, and I am a careful man, was what I had seen in the 4 seconds before Hethran stopped. I had seen the Vorkai run its full target assessment on Marin Solis. I had seen it reach the end of the assessment, and I had seen it arrive with the unambiguous clarity of an apex predator that has processed every variable and returned a result. At a conclusion, the Keth Bonded had spent 9 years and a considerable station budget trying to install through artificial means. It had recognized something, not a handler, not a controller, not a threat to neutralize or a presence to ignore. It had recognized someone who belonged at the front. The neural bond had simply lost the argument.